Hi there. I'm so glad you decided to join us for Seek. Thanks so much. Let me tell you a bit about what Seek is and a bit about who I am and what you're in for the next 13 sessions, sometimes done over 10 weeks. First off, my name is Dave Schmelzer. I live in the beautiful city of Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm part of a community that's developed around all the stuff that we'll be talking about in Seek. Seek itself has been developed over about the last 10 years. It's been taught now, I personally have taught it to hundreds of people. And every time we've done debriefs and kind of debrief what's worked and what hasn't and what's useful for people as we explore this question of faith. What does it look like to be a person of faith? And we've really targeted Seek at people for whom faith is a newer thing. Not to say they've never heard of faith. They may have grown up in faith communities, but they've been away from it for a long period of time perhaps. They're wondering what it would look like to come back. Or they really are exploring it fresh for the first time. And so that's the spirit of it. I'll tell you a bit about the individual sessions before we're done. But I want to start off by saying that while we have found Seek to be super helpful for people from any and all faith backgrounds, and I believe I've actually been in pretty serious conversation with people in Seek from every faith background, at least of the major faith traditions, and many, many people from no faith background at all, where secularism or atheism is their story, as it's been my story. At the same time, we have a bias, and I want to fly that bias right away. And the bias is we're going to consider faith from the perspective of Jesus. Maybe just because that's been what's been most helpful for me. And we're going to talk in some detail in the next session about why we're doing it from that lens. But that said, people have taken Seek from, again, all faith traditions and no faith traditions, and I think have found it to be quite helpful. So maybe, to be fair, if we're going to have the bias of faith in Jesus as where we're starting from, we should start with why you shouldn't consider faith in Jesus. We're going to give time, and you can get out now. There's an exit over here. It's clearly marked, or over there. So really, you can get out. You do not have to stay. And I'm going to pitch you on why you shouldn't do this experience. And maybe I can tell you a bit about my background, about why I'm going to make that pitch. So I grew up in a household with a dad who'd had a bad faith experience in a small-town church in the Midwest. I'm still not sure, to this day, I know all the details of what went so bad. But at the very least, it seemed to him to be kind of a repressive, rules-based, unpleasant place. That seems very true. And he was eager to leave it behind by the time I was born. My mom, on the other hand, had grown up in churches perfectly pleasantly. I think at the time she might be called what you might consider a nominal churchgoer, meaning in name only, I guess is what nominal means. So she'd be happy enough to, she believed in God, absolutely. If you were to ask her, do you believe in Jesus? Absolutely. But that was probably about the extent of it for her. By the time my sister, who's 2 years older than I am, and I were born, my mom started talking with my dad on probably what would be sort of a 1950s understanding of what faith is supposed to do for you, and said, good citizens give their kids a faith upbringing. And so my sister's name is Lori, and I should go to church, and we should be taken to a church. I don't think my dad was excited about that, but he was willing to give on that one. And so from the time I was pretty young, my sister and I were taken to a mainline church. I actually never saw the inside of the church building. All I ever saw was the kids' church program. And my memory of kids' church there, this might be skewed by the years, is that we were taught every week by older women who didn't like children. It really was the sense that we would show up and they would look at us like, you came back. Why would you do that? And we felt bad about coming back, and it really was my parents, they made me come back. And so I remember thinking, in that whole young period of my life, I hate this experience. It was such an unpleasant thing. I remember telling people that my least favorite day of the week was Sundays. As like a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, I would say things like that. So by the time I was 10, a watershed moment happened for me, for my family. It was just great news all around. My sister, who is a bolder temperament than I am to this day, decided she'd had enough. And so she went to my parents and said, I am never going back to that place again. I hate it. Dave hates it. He's too cowardly to tell you. He's hiding behind the chair over there, but he hates it. And we're never going back. And that's it. And like it worked. I think probably because my mom did not have quorum, because my dad was thinking, fantastic. You know, I've been waiting for this day when she would get old enough to fight back. And so that was it. We never went back. And my parents, until decades later, never went back to churches. So this was a watershed moment for my family. My dad was so excited we weren't going to be doing this anymore. And that started a period of time for me of questioning, of trying to figure out what did I actually believe about this stuff. Whatever I learned in this kids program didn't help me in that quest. And so I remember praying and seeing if something would happen, and it didn't. That seemed conclusive. And by the time I got into my teenage years, probably early high school, I started picking fights with people of faith. I don't know why I did it. I somehow was I was really engaged, I was really interested in questions of faith, and I couldn't let it pass. And so literally, if I met anybody who said they went to church, or if they went to synagogue, I would pick a fight with them. And basically what I would start saying is, why would you do something like that? And they would say, often, because I believe in God. I'd say, fantastic. Why do you believe in God? And they would say, well, one answer would be, because my parents believe in God, and they've taken me to some faith tradition, and I've never had any reason to doubt it. And what I would always say back is, that's great, but I don't have your parents, so that's probably not going to do it for me. Now, some people would push back a little bit harder, and they would say, I believe in God because I have a relationship with God, or some would say a relationship with Jesus. And I was just merciless with these people. I would say, a relationship, like you go rock climbing with Jesus. Catch a movie on Saturday nights, write a letter. Relationship to me implies that people relate. And I don't even know what that means. It's a meaningless statement. Now at this point, what almost everybody would say is, I'm leaving, you're mean. Fair enough, it struck me. But a few people would stick with me and push back further and say things like, no, seriously, I do. I feel like God answers my prayers. And I would say, like, give me a for instance. And they would often say things like, well, last week I was sick and I prayed to get better and I'm better. And I would say, well, I'm not up on the current science, but I think the latest medical science has revealed this unknown thing called getting better. People do get better. So I'm not quite sure how God factors in. And they would say, well, I believe it was God. And I would say, see, that's the thing. You can believe it, and that's fine, but there's nothing compelling me to believe it. And so my philosophy of life began to be, if there's a God, hypothetically, let's say there is, God's way out there, and we're down here, and there's this big gap between us, and there's really nothing that could break that gap. There's no answered prayer that could convince me that, oh, it's God. What answered prayer could ever convince an outside observer that something that happened in the world was God? Maybe to the person themselves it'd be meaningful, that's fantastic, but it certainly wouldn't apply to anybody outside of them. And that's kind of where I camped out. Let me go back to this question about why not to consider faith in Jesus. At the very least, you can understand that's where I come from. That's my whole background. Was in the end, by the time I hit my college years, I was a formal atheist debater. And I'll tell you stories about how that happened when I was in college. But having talked, as I said, to I think hundreds of people now in the Seek course, and having polled a fair amount of them about why has it been a barrier for you to consider faith, what they've often said has coalesced under 4 general categories. One reason people often don't consider faith in Jesus is rigidity. Is faith all about rules? I think that was probably my dad's experience in this small church in this small town in the Midwest, that what little I've gotten from him says that his faith was all about don't drink, don't dance, don't swear, don't do this. And I think most people in those settings feel like, in the end, I kind of want something that will help me do, not don't do. I kind of want something that's going to make my life better as a result of being a part of it, not that will shut down things that sound fun unless you tell me they're not. Is faith, in the end, a big rule book? And that comes up all the time. And as you can imagine, it's not just in small town churches like my dad. It's all over the world in all faith traditions. As you hear stories, and I've heard a lot of them from people growing up in very different settings than I did, they say, absolutely, what I got from my mosque, church, synagogue, wherever, was one big set of rules. And that's just not appealing to many, many people. I think another reason why you should probably hesitate to consider faith, much less faith in Jesus, is distrust. Now, I'm in Boston. In Boston, we had things happen probably a decade ago that have spread all over the world and have not shown any signs of slowing down. We've had scandals with clergy and people that have been abused by clergy. And you can imagine, it started here and it became this huge deal. And I've talked to, I don't know how many people who have left their church, their faith tradition, because they no longer trust the people involved. And that raises questions then like, why should I trust anybody who claims to, quote, speak for God? Why would I do that? That sounds like a racket to me, because it gives them all the power in the conversation. And haven't we passed that as a society? I don't trust organized religion. I don't trust people who claim to speak for something bigger than them. I remember in my teen debating years, I was watching a 60 minutes expose on corrupt preachers. And it confirmed all of my stereotypes. It really was that they would find some television preacher, and they would investigate behind the scenes. And again, you've got to say, when it's 60 minutes knocking on the door with 3 people and a crew, your life has just turned bad. Man, it did not go well for these guys, because sure enough, when it's 60 minutes, they are going to find the private jet. You know, they are going to find the second home on the island. They are going to find, you know, whatever phoniness there is in the things you claim to have done. They will find it. And indeed, they did a good job. And that just made me feel like it's all a big racket. You bet. I don't trust these people. And that is universal. I talk to so many people that say, absolutely, I don't trust people who would claim to talk about God.